All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focused, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. I am just getting recharged after some time off for the 4th of July holiday and getting back in the swing of things. But I'm looking forward to today's conversation because we're going to be talking about what it really means. There's a lot of talk about the need for improving skills in employees and a lot of the changes that are coming as a result of the changing landscape of work and tech and all this stuff. And how do we build those skills? But then this starts to integrate the question of, okay, well, we were still figuring that out. And now we got to layer in, now we got AI in the mix. And so what does it look like when we integrate AI, but integrate AI with purpose? And so that is going to be the topic of discussion today, is how is AI really transforming the way we develop and grow skills? But there's a lot of hidden implications buried within that is going to come out in this. So hold on, because this is going to be a wild one. But to navigate this, I am rejoined by Hugh Newton-Hill. He is the managing director of North America at a company called Attensi. So Hugh, I think this is what, your second or third? How many times have you been on here with me?
I think this is the third time.
I think this is
the third time we've been on. Yeah.
I think so. So always good to have you back. And so you and I know each other well, but some folks may not. So brief introduction on who you are and how you got where you are.
Yeah, brilliant. And thanks so much for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure to be here and discuss these topics in such a great format. I've been with Attensi for a number of years now. Attensi is a company that's born out of two worlds. The one is the game development space, and the second is sort of the consulting environment, bringing those two worlds together to scale impactful change and skill development really across industries. I'm a consultant by background, so I come from that world, and I've learned a lot about game development from the great people that we have on board with Attensi.
Okay, awesome. Well, and I do remember our very first conversation. We did an icebreaker that ended up resulting in a pretty lengthy conversation on Crash Bandicoot. And
yes,
what
exactly.
a great, fantastic game that was in its day.
Yeah.
So we won't be arguing about best video games ever this round. But I think it's an interesting intersection to think about the world of game design and how we think about things. So as we kind of dive into this, I'm actually really curious, as an organization, which has been focused for quite some time on this intersection of game design and skill development, which is kind of a unique flavor, because sometimes people hear game and learning and they think, Jeopardy or things like that. That is not the world you play in. This is true simulation-based skilled. These are serious games, I guess would be the best term that I would put in there.
We'd love to drop the word game, but that's because people think about Candy Crush.
They do. They think of it as a gimmick, because in some ways it has been positioned that way as a gimmick. And it's like, it's really not.
Yeah. So I think it's all about deconstructing what is a game and what are those game mechanics. So when we're talking with internally, we talk a lot about the game mechanics that we can apply to what we build. And the other piece that I guess is key from a technology point of view is a lot of what we've done is built on a game engine. So that's empowering a lot of the differentiation that we have. But yeah, the gaming terminology definitely evokes different reactions from people.
Well, and I'm actually curious on this topic first, before we go deeper into some of these other things, because I'm curious if culturally you're seeing some of that shift, because I think as new generations come into leadership and things like that, I think there is some different generational perceptions of what games can mean. I think certain generations look at games through a very specific lens and go, oh, that's what game means. Others look at it this way. Are you seeing that affect the way people view games? Like I said, I don't like the word when I think of it that way, because I'm like, well, there's mechanics, there's a science behind it, but a lot of people think of it as like cheeky Flappy Bird type stuff.
No, there's definitely a shift. If you think about the generations that are coming into the workforce now and have for the last 10, 15 years, they grew up playing video games on consoles. And we'll call that a video game in the sense because humans have always played games. But it might have been board games, and it might have been cards, and it might have been other things playing up. But the video game generations are now very much embedded within corporate workforces. So when we talk about digital video games and that being a way to learn, it generally has a pretty positive response. I think
Okay.
there's also just a lot of bad examples of people claiming to do games for learning, and you're like, this is just really bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd say that's what we're fighting against more, is more like the bad stuff that's out there.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Cause I can see, like you said, I think there is a new generation moving into leadership where, like you said, there's the familiarity with it. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
okay, we can relate to games and we understand that even just some of the social connection. I mean, I was a gamer growing up, and some of the social connection, some of the things that you did around it, where it has a little more context than this kind of foreign games for learning.
yeah,
You're like, yeah, I get it. But I can completely see that from there's lots of really bad examples where it's like, no, this is gamified learning. And people go, ew,
yeah.
gross.
I'm just gonna put my hands up to try and get this light to come on again. But I have to move.
You're fine. We can still see
I'm
you.
very happy to do that on my TV.
You
I'll
can
grab
do that the
just
rest of the show. It's totally fine. You just dance around like that. It's great.
one of our best designers has the celebration move, so we've
Yeah,
now
there you
adopted
go.
that into everything that we do. That's a
You're
shout out.
bringing back Raise the Roof. I like it.
Exactly. No, where were we? Sorry, what I was going to say is what you touched on there is gamified as well, and I think that has certain connotations to it, which is like,
Yeah.
taking existing content, taking existing experiences, processes, giving people points and rewards, and having a leaderboard. And that, I think, gamifying an experience is one game mechanic. So
Yes.
we've migrated our language. We talk much more about game-based learning, and
Yes.
gamification being the points and leaderboards is one mechanic, but simulation is part of a game. That's a game mechanic in itself. The ability to repeat content and gain mastery is part of a game mechanic, and the way that you tap into the way that the brain works through narrative and stories is also a game mechanic. So there's so many more features than gamification of content.
I think actually that misunderstanding for folks just in general is super helpful. I remember I took a course at Wharton on game design,
Yeah,
and it was very helpful in inciting that there's a big difference between gamification, where you're slapping game elements as
yeah,
almost a bolt on to an existing experience to go, here, we're trying to make it addictive or fun or tap into your dopamine hit to get you to do
yeah,
the things we were already planning on doing, which
yes,
honestly, even gamification is a whole field in and of itself, where I would say that there's good examples and bad examples, where it's like, well, you can do that
absolutely.
really well, or you can do that really poorly. But
Yeah,
then there's this whole other game-based learning, which is, to your point, that's like a whole nother animal, of which gamification is a very, very small, like, okay, yeah, that might be an ingredient in the master recipe, but that's it.
exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Well, and they're a great example. I mean, Duolingo, debatably one of the best in the space of gamifying content, getting people to go on streaks, getting people to move forward. But I don't know if there would be a fully game-based solution. They are incorporating elements of game-based, but often the narrative is not so strong in what they do, because that's not a game leader that they need to pull on. But they do generate a pull factor from their users. People keep going in, people
For
keep
sure.
engaging with it, which is a very, very admirable thing for people in the digital learning space.
Well, and I think that's a great example of where, that can be helpful if you're going for engagement and things like that. But I think it
Mhm.
also drives, even with, game-based learning or however you want to, slice it, it also can have it's a double-edged sword. And I've actually
Yeah,
seen even the gamification side, where early in my career, back in my days, where you hear something, you get excited and you go, we should do that more, and you haven't really thought through why or how. I remember there was one instance where we applied gamification elements to something, and it worked really well.
yeah,
Unfortunately, it created an addictive nature to something that ultimately wasn't adding value to
hmm,
employees, and it was actually distracting them from their
yeah,
work. And we had to shut the whole thing down, because ultimately we discovered, yeah, it worked. we got people hooked on this thing, but the problem is now they're so hooked on this thing that isn't actually solving a real problem, that it's now become a distraction. And we were actually getting feedback that it's like, well, performance is actually going down because of this
Hmm.
thing. And it's like, it worked too well. And you're like, wait, what? But it
Yeah,
goes back to why you have to understand what problem you're trying to solve. Because if you don't,
exactly.
some of these things that are super powerful can blow up in your face real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are countless examples of where gamification has fallen through. I think that one of the more classic ones is when you see people gaming the system, right? Finding out ways to, if you create mandatory training hours or whatever it is that feeds into performance reviews, that people find ways to game that system, and inherently that's part of what we do, and that in itself is a game mechanic. Like
Yes.
we often put Easter eggs in games for people who are curious and who explore and want to find out, oh, what happens if I touch this? What happens if I touch this? What happens if I speak to that customer? What happens if I make this decision? That curiosity is fantastic, and it's great to bring that out. But sometimes, as you say, it can lead to unforeseen consequences if you haven't fully thought through the ecosystem you're building
Right.
behind an
Well, and
intervention.
at the end of the day, when you think about people, they only have so much capacity, and every button or lever you push, there's a reaction and an equal opposite
Yeah,
reaction. And so sometimes you're experimenting and you don't quite know, okay, great, we got them incentivized on this, but at what cost? Like, what did we
yeah,
disincentivize to get them? And I've seen that. I've worked in a lot of sales organizations,
yeah,
and you see that happen all the time in sales, where it's like, we're going to
yeah,
incentivize this.
yeah,
And boy, people will play that game mechanic,
yeah,
and then all of a sudden you go, wait, why'd the floor drop out over here? And it was like, well, because
yeah.
everybody realized they could boost their revenue, their income, if they did this
Been
thing,
down that route.
and they trick the system, and ultimately it leads to unintended consequences over here.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not to be taken lightly. And
No,
I think that's one of the other things that I think is disappointing about some of the reputation game-based learning or gamification can have, is like, it's fun, it's light, it's harmless. And it's like, no, you actually have to take it very seriously, because
yeah,
it can be a very powerful tool
yeah,
that, wielded well,
yeah,
great; wielded poorly, you can lose an arm.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that people do sometimes think, we see it sometimes when people think, oh, gamification is great for, as you say, light topics or for dry topics, all that. But we would argue it's great for really the deeper behavior change. That's where we see the best impact. And when you think about behavior change, I think the combi model is a helpful place to start, which is, say, if you want to change someone's behaviors, you need to give them the knowledge of what they need to do, what they should be doing. You need to give them an opportunity to practice that in a safe environment and to build that sense of mastery. But you also need to give them motivation. And those are the three factors. If they come together, you can really get people to change behaviors. So
Yeah.
your example in the sales environment, which is very incentive driven, that's a big pull on motivation. We're driving your motivations by giving you big incentives to
Right. We're
drive
changing your compensation
what's that.
structure.
Exactly. Not all learning organizations have the ability to pull that across the whole
Yes.
organization. So you need to find different ways to tap into that motivation to change. And games are a fantastic way of doing it. I mean, I'm, as you can tell from my accent, and you know me, but others might not originally from the US, but when I was learning
That's not a
the
Boston
rules.
accent you have? I don't know. I thought that
No,
was a really
no.
thick Boston accent you were
No,
carrying.
no, no, no. I'm in Charlestown, so I'm in the thick of it, but not haven't called the town accent yet. But when I was learning the rules of football, like, I could sit and I could watch what was going on and ask friends, and that was a good way to learn. But really, the best way for me to learn was to pick up Madden and play for myself and figure out. And I made lots of mistakes and I failed as I was going through. I got to the end and I watched my next game and I'm like, I know how this game works. But it didn't feel like I was being trained or I was learning when I was playing that game. And I think we have a long way in creating those experiences for our people. You're really on those big behavioral topics that we know change the needle in performance and drive value.
Yeah. It's funny you bring that example up. because anybody who knows me knows like I'm not a sports person. I couldn't name a
Hmm.
sports team to save my life. Um, but I know how all the sports work because of like what you said. I played
Yeah,
a lot of video games, and so I knew the mechanics. I knew how the
yeah,
plays were called. I knew when it made sense to play certain plays. I knew, all this stuff because it was like, well, I played sports. I didn't play sports in a traditional sense, but I got
yeah,
it, type of a thing. And it is interesting how I think many people can relate to that. Oh, you actually learn more about, part of the reason people know so much about international espionage is because they all played Goldeneye. So you're
yes,
like,
yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
get it. Like I know what I have to do. I have a mission. I've got to accomplish these things, but we don't
yeah,
realize that it's actually a very powerful way to teach people things in a way that doesn't feel like you're being
yeah.
taught. And I think that
Super powerful.
is super powerful.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of design, right? Like, understanding. I don't know if we move to a soccer example. Use that. I didn't call it football. I transitioned to soccer there, but understanding like when you need to make your run to get offsides, or when to take what type of shot, and where to take the shot to increase your probability of scoring. Like there are lots of design decisions that are made there that are made by people who understand soccer. Like
Yes.
you need people to do that. And I think where I'm going with this is transitioning to our AI topic,
Yeah.
which is a lot of the questions, or what we often get asked by people is like, what's going to be the role of designers and SMEs when it comes to this new world of generative AI? And and I think generative AI is coming a long way in understanding the basics of how things work and progressing.
Yeah.
But we are still firm believers in that for your business critical areas, you're going to want someone with a design background who understands and knows your business to be able to make sure that you're creating the experiences that are spot on for your organization.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and
so
the part
that's
that you bring in that I think does transition well to the AI piece is one of the other things that I think goes grossly overlooked when it comes to really good game design is there's a level and attention to detail on that is unmatched. I mean, I have hired many game designers into my orgs over the years because of the fact that they truly understand user experience in a way
mhm,
that I think no other field does. Like they think about, well, how is this person feeling in this moment and how am I creating this
yeah,
environment that does this and how am I they think about exactly what that user is doing in that exact moment and what they're trying to create and incentivize in a way that I don't know there's any other field that I've actually interacted with that has that level of detail around
yeah,
user experience design. But the challenge with that, and I think this gets to the AI pieces, that is extremely time consuming
yes,
and sucks a lot of energy and resources to come up with that level of detail. And that's largely why historically simulation game based type stuff was very time and resource intensive to create or
yeah,
expensive
yeah,
because that level you can slap a PowerPoint together, throw some narration over the top of it, and shove it into an LMS with little skill, and you can do it relatively quickly. Like that doesn't
yeah,
take a whole lot of effort to actually think about a user and an experience and create and craft an environment that is designed to drive a certain behavior and reinforce certain things. You don't do that in an afternoon spitballing in PowerPoint. It just does not
right.
happen that way.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the big advance that's coming. I mean, yeah, I've seen a lot of bad PowerPoints. I've seen a lot of great PowerPoints as
Yes.
well. But now, in our platform, and I'm sure in many other platforms, and if it's not there, I would say it probably will be in the future. Is the ability to get a straw man or a wireframe at the click of a button.
Yes.
So you can get that starting point almost instantaneously with all the game design features, the characters, the voicing, the 3D environments, the scoring mechanisms. All of that now sits within the platform and can be automatically generated. Now, where you're spot on is editing that user experience for a PowerPoint is a lot easier because it's a two-dimensional PowerPoint that there are only so many things you can change. You can change your font color, you can change your font size, you can change your different images. When you get into game design, there's so many different levers you can pull.
Oh
So
yeah.
what
And
we're
the skill set. I mean, I just think,
yeah,
I just remember some of the stuff that mocking up,
yeah,
there's only so many people who know how to work in Unity.
yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah,
to mock up or make a modification, it can become just
yeah. What's great,
intensive.
I mean, our platform's built on Unity and it's now no code. I mean, it's always been no code to be honest, but now you can get to that generative AI output without code. Now there's still a lot of attention to detail as you're talking
Yes.
about. You're saying if the player makes this decision in this moment, what are the implications throughout the experience? Like that stuff you need to understand and you need to toggle on and off, but you don't need coding experience. You just need someone who's smart, has strong attention to detail, and understands the business and that user experience, but it's not a coder, which is
Well, and
really
I think
exciting
this
for a lot
this
of people.
gets to that shift that I was curious how you're looking at integrating some of this, because before it was a bit of a unicorn. Well, and actually it wasn't even a unicorn. This is why you had entire teams that specialized in this, because you had to have somebody who could actually do the design work, to do the mock-ups, all this very time intensive, labor intensive. Then you had to have somebody who would do, user experience design. You had business analysts. I mean, it was a very laborious process. And I think about the fact that, yeah, AI can help with some of that stuff, but you also don't just want to me, one of the biggest risks I see with AI right now is there's a lot of hype about AI's capability and the
Yeah,
fact that, it's the same as a person.
yeah,
And I'm like, it is not the same as a person. And even when I hear AI created this or AI did this, when you actually scratch beneath the surface, you're like, no, AI was used by a team of experts
yes,
that then did what they had in their head, type of a thing. But AI itself is nothing but a tool in the
yeah.
hands of the creator.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Could not agree more. And I mean that's why we're so excited about this because this has always been our sweet spot of how do you take the latest and greatest technologies and create a design interface for the smartest and greatest designers to create user experiences. So
Okay.
the initial design for us was Unity was the game engine we selected. We built a layer on top of Unity that then designers could use to build all different types of games, from 3D environment VR simulations to mobile apps. Now the evolution of that now is like, okay, generative AI is a fantastic tool, and one of the examples is thinking about using voice recognition, AI generated characters to create a lot more variation in that game experience.
Okay.
If you compare it to multiplayer online games, they have massive amounts of gameplay that's taken, years to develop with massive teams. Organizations don't have the resources to create that amount of gameplay, but now generative AI can do that a lot for you. So I can go through the same designed experience in saying the designer has identified a character, they've given that character a personality, certain characteristics. I have the same objectives as the player, but that character will react differently based on what I say and honestly based on what they're thinking. Like part of this generative AI is it is variable. You can't control it. So we
Yeah.
don't know
It's a bit of a
exactly what
black
we're going to say.
box.
We can put guardrails on it, but it creates the variability that increases repetition. Like that's why we repeat games so many times because each time we do it, we get a different outcome, or many times we get a different outcome. And we've really struggled to do that in digital learning. Now, and generative AI is allowing us to do that.
Okay. Well, and so I want to talk about this and dig into this a little more, because I think the term that we're starting to hit on is, when I think about AI and where we're going in not just learning, but as a whole, there's a lot of focus on let's do AI for everything. And I get a little unnerved sometimes when I hear that, because it's like AI can be really, it's similar to game design, game-based learning, where it's like it's a powerful tool. And
Mhm.
with powerful tools, you can do incredible things and you can make really, really big messes really, really
Yeah,
fast.
Yeah.
And so as you kind of look at some of this stuff, what are some of the ways that, because what we're getting at is personalization. And
Yeah.
I think that is such a critical element of where AI can be used in really powerful ways, is to say, hey, this is a dynamic experience for somebody, and there's somebody on the other end of that, and this person's different than the next one, is different than the next
Yeah.
one, and their needs are unique and different. So you hit on a couple of those things, but how is that starting to integrate? We talked about some of it from the design element, but how are you looking at integrating that, and what is some of the possibilities you're seeing now that 3 years ago you would have went, we just wouldn't have had a path to figure this out?
Yeah, absolutely. There are many aspects. I mean, if people haven't seen what the Khan Academy is doing in this space in terms of the tutor that they have, and Salman's Khan's book on I think it's breakthrough thinking of the next generation on education. I think that's a great place for a holistic education. When we focus on ourselves and sort of the more enterprise space, there is that meeting the learner where they're at, which is super powerful. I think in the past we've really struggled to identify where people really need to develop. What are those skills that they really need to develop? And you can do it through a multiple choice question, and you can say, okay, do you understand the grow model? What are the three different elements? What are some of
There's
the things
often a
you want
lot of
to do?
assumptions that goes into
I
this.
should
There's
open
tons of
use
assumptions that go into it.
open or close questions. Yeah, oh, you scored
Yep.
80% on the quiz, so now you know how to be a coach. Right? We all know that's not the case. But using generative AI in combination with really deep simulated experiences, you can understand where people are at a lot more holistically. So if we continue this coaching example, if I want to understand your coaching capability, it'll take me a long time through asking you certain questions, getting to understand where you're at, but ideally also observing you coaching someone else. That's really where I'll get to understand how you perform and how you understand as a coach. And generative AI can play that role play. They can be the character that you're coaching. At the same time, it can be that coach and mentor figure that is giving you that personalized feedback and then almost closing the loop on that experience. So it's generative AI is generating that simulated experience for you to practice, to gain knowledge. It's evaluating you and giving you feedback. And then it's generating another experience based on the development areas that you have. And I think in this environment, you have a fantastic sort of holistic understanding of skill development to do the assessment and to do the generation of content. So that's a super exciting one. I think the other one where, at least from my perspective, we really are thought leaders in this is user generated experiences. So
Yeah.
this has been really hard in the past. And I think this will be a massive pull factor that we've missed out in digital learning is everything has been push. Like everything that we want people to do is a push factor. And if it has been pull, it's been fairly light. There's some examples of where that has worked, where people have been taking it forward. But I think giving that user agency to define the experience that they want to go through and the learning that they need to have will be super powerful. So again, on that coaching analogy, you can go into this experience, define the character that you want to have that coaching conversation with. Is it a peer? Is it someone in another team? What's your relationship like with them? Is it strong or weak? What are their development areas? How do you expect them to come into this conversation? Then you can practice that designed experience fully personalized to you. You could do that hours before you have that coaching conversation in real life. And I think that's something that is super powerful and will unlock a lot of pull from users to be engaging with digital learning and training, independent of programs.
So I'm curious your take on this, because this may open up a whole new topic. Is as you look at the landscape of where things are going, and I agree. I think one of the things I'm most excited about with technology is more the role leaders can play in the development of their people. Because of the fact that instead of having to kind of wait for someone else to create something for them, they can kind of say, here's what I need based on my unique situation. Where do you see that ultimately falling? Because I run into mixed situations where I think in an ideal world, we would get to the point where that is the case. I think in the real world, I see this complexity where it requires a level of skill that many leaders aren't equipped with. And I'm
Yeah,
curious to how far you see it going or where you're even seeing adoption, from this, because I think user generated content and user, kind of led stuff it's been a push for quite a while. And I think there's a lot of value in it. I feel like I often see there's a skill gap in people being able to execute it. And I'm curious what you're
yeah,
seeing.
yeah. I completely agree. Um, there's a skill gap, certainly. There's also, coming back to the combi model around the motivation. Like, if people sometimes don't see this, particularly leaders. Like, my job is to manage them on my team on very specific tasks. It's not my job to holistically develop people. And I think that mindset definitely needs to shift. And I know there's a lot of work that's
I
going
agree.
into how you can unlock, particularly middle management in
Yep.
this aspect. Um, I do think, again, like user generated content, to your point, there needs to be very strong guardrails around it. So the example that I was giving just to go a bit deeper, there's still a very heavy design component that goes before that user generation.
Okay.
So there's still, I would say, 90% of that experience is defined by, like, this is what a good coaching conversation should look like at a 10C. This is the different phases of that coaching conversation. This is how I'm going to assess performance. This is the type of
Okay.
feedback I'm going to give. There's a lot there. And then I'm almost choosing from a drop down. These are the
Got
4 or
it.
5 things you want to practice. And I think there, we need to lighten the load on managers.
I agree.
And I think giving them that, if you simplify that example, I would say go practice this experience with these 3 features, and then you can go make it happen. And that's a much easier lift than having to create your own, as you said, user generated content.
Well, and where I love where you landed on that is I think this is one of the polar spectrums that I often see where the pendulum swings in the industry and just in terms of, organizations as a whole, where and you see this happen all the time with learning in a company, where it will go from it's the manager's job and companies will literally just dump the whole thing on them and go, you are responsible for the development of your team. And you're dumping it on a group of people who go, I've got to manage a team. I've got to keep them going. I don't have the capability to be a master at knowing how to do this really well, but now it's dumped on me. Then what you'll see, and I've watched companies go through this cycle over and over and over, is they dump it all on the manager. It doesn't happen, which is understandable because they go, I don't have the skill set, the time, or the energy to do 100% of this stuff. Then it's almost like the pendulum swings back the other way, where it's like, well, now we're going to have a corporate or a central learning group, and they are going to be everything. And they're going to create all the things and know all the details and make all the stuff. And then what you see is the company goes, well, now we have a bunch of stuff that is almost too generic or too general for people. It's not moving at the pace or the speed that we need as an organization. It's not really meeting our needs. And then you watch the cycle repeat. Then they're like, you know what the problem is? Managers need to do it. And you're like, what you described is that happy medium of there is that 80%. I say it usually falls about 80%. The 80% that needs to be mastered by a subject matter expert who specializes in skill development and goes, we know what the core skills are. We know the right triggers and levers to pull. We know how to frame that, how to structure it, how to do some of that. But then we need you as the leader to take him that extra 20% and actually go, you're the one who really knows the specific topics they need. And if there are specific flavors that they need to apply on. And I think striking that right balance has honestly, the number of companies I talk to who they're somewhere on the wrong end of that spectrum.
For sure. I think very few companies strike that balance, but I do think generative AI has the potential to help us do that. Because as you say, the experts in how people learn, the topics of scaffolding, mastery learning, even the COM-B model, the state of flow between challenge and reward, the understanding of how people learn. Not all managers in the business can be expected to know that. And I don't think they all need to know that. I mean, the ones who are interested, great, and at least personally, I found it a very, very interesting topic. But they're busy; they've got a lot to do. So
yeah, even if they have an interest in it, they don't have the time to develop a deep skill set in it.
Exactly. So as the learning professional and the learning profession, we need to own that space and say we're going to provide that 80% base. But then also have the humility that we're not in the sales example. We're not in sales conversations every day.
Right.
So we need you to add that lens or that perspective or that context. And we're seeing some really exciting ways of bringing those two worlds together that are different to the collaboration model we've seen in the past, which is like a joint team together for the entire development. And then, as you say, it takes way too long to develop. SMEs are saying we don't have enough time and capacity. They're kind of reviewing it. They're not taking full ownership of the end product because it takes too much time. And the classic challenges we've seen over and over again.
Yeah.
I think generative AI is giving us a real way to solve some of that collaboration challenge, and then we can really have what we've all been striving for, is to get the learning organization more aligned with the business by focusing on what we each do best.
Well, and something you said that jumps out that I really want to reinforce on this is you talked about humility and the humility it requires. And I don't think it's from any one particular group, but from everyone in recognizing, you know what? If you are not a person who has specialized in human performance and development, there are things that you just don't understand. And you have to recognize that and go, look, I went to school. I, maybe have done some things. I've raised some kids. Like I know something, but it's not my specialty. And so if you say this is the best way to do it, I'm going to have to step back and say, okay, might be unfamiliar, might be a little different than I would have expected, but I'm going to step back and do that. But I would give the same message to the L&D professionals, because we can sometimes have a habit of going, we are the masters of everything. We know best in every situation. We have all the answers, and we don't. And we don't actually know what is truly needed. And we don't actually understand the nuance and complexity of what's really going on and why this doesn't work. And it's easy to sit from, your armchair and go, that's why it's going wrong. And I've been in many organizations where L&D gets kicked out of the room because they're sitting here lecturing the business leader on how it should work. And the business leader's going, you think I have not thought of this? Like, are you really insulting my intelligence right now as if I have no idea what that means? And we have to be willing to let go of that 20% and go, you know better than I do. And I think that mutual humility is really the only way we get there, because when everybody's competing to be the best and the smartest in the room, it just goes nowhere.
It certainly does not work out well.
No.
That's good. And I mean, it is part of the other thing that I've spoken a lot about on this topic is the salesmanship of the learning and development community. Typically is not that strong, I would say. We are not marketers or salespeople. So I'd say that part of sales is a big part of it is influence, right? And you need to, if you're coming into an initiative in a discussion with the business, I've seen some really bad examples of bringing a framework of what are your learning objectives, what are the things people need to, what are the behaviors people need to change, and like smashing that over the head with someone. Until you can give these to me, I can't go away and I can't work on this project. What's the impact of this project going to be? And it's like this, I don't know what you call it, something that you're hitting on someone's head, rather than this collaborative, dynamic of being like, these are some things I'd love to discuss with you, because it's hard for the business. They don't often know what are those
No.
behaviors that move people from A to B. And
Well, and
part
many
of your
people
job
don't
is
think
being a
like that.
consultant. No.
I think that's one of the biggest things that, especially learning coming from a very academic
Yeah.
setting, a lot of times it's like, well, obviously this is how it is because XYZ theory says so.
Yeah.
And therefore, everyone should just know that. And because we tend to think in terms of people and behaviors, we assume that, well, so everyone should just think that way. And
Yeah.
most people don't. I would say most people don't really understand the complexity of human behavior and what goes into it. So, to your point, having the empathy to go, you're asking questions, and I've seen this. Fill out
Yeah.
the learning request form.
Yes, exactly.
And there are questions that it's like, I guarantee they don't have answers to these
No.
questions. And it's not because they don't know, but it's
Yeah.
because they need help
Yeah.
figuring it out. Because they're like, I don't think this way.
Yeah.
That's not, I don't wake up in the morning and go, what does good behavior change look like? And
Yeah.
how would I measure success with that? It's like, most people,
Exactly.
not even just, I think a lot of learning professionals don't even
Yeah.
necessarily always think that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's to that humility and that true collaboration point. I do think there's a really good opportunity as we're on this topic, of I would love to see more L&D professionals and people. I think generative AI has the potential for you to really be a thought leader within the organization, because everyone is thinking about this, everyone is talking about it. And if you don't yet have a perspective on how generative AI is or isn't going to change what you do and how you operate, you are falling to the backbenches and you no longer are a true partner with the business. So for us, it's been very much an exploration over the last 18 months. So, even before OpenAI released ChatGPT, the first instance of ChatGPT used to be, well, how are we going to use GPTs and LLMs to transform what we do? And it was quite a long process, but where we landed on was we were going to focus on what we did really well, and we have three pillars around that, which is realism, game-based mechanics, and impact. And
Okay.
then under those pillars, we looked at, okay, how is this new technology going to help us do that even better? And that's where we land. It's like we're not really changing what we do. There are definitely innovations that come, but the objective that we're trying to drive is still the same. Just as I said, with creating these designer platforms that used to be on, or still are on Unity, but how they inform LLMs. And I think as a talent development or as a people organization, you need to have that perspective, and you need to do that exploration, even if it ends up being in a place where we've assessed the market, we've assessed what's out there, and we've decided that we're going to wait 3 months. That's a perfectly fine opinion, but I would say you need to have that opinion to be a true partner.
Well, and it's so funny how in so many of my conversations about AI, so much of what ends up coming out is the human elements and the human skills and the human behaviors that have to be managed first. And at the end of the day, that is really where you should be spending your time. Because if you spend your time there well, the AI questions get answered for themselves.
Yes.
You end up going to your example right there. If you're spending your time going, we are deeply understanding what we do as an organization, where our organization is, we're building relationships, we're building influence, we're doing all these things. Then when the question comes up of, so what are you doing with generative AI? You're going to go, well, these are the things we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so we need to see how it can enhance and
Yeah.
improve those. And then again, put in the work to go. And so based on our assessment of where things are and how things work, these are the things we're doing. These are the things we're not doing, because from a maturity standpoint, it's not where we need it to be to feel comfortable doing it. And but so often we end up going down the path of, well, I need to know everything there is to know about generative AI so that I can implement generative AI on everything. And I can say I did the AI thing. And it's like, that's
good luck. Good luck.
It's
Yeah,
so
I think.
true, though. I mean, I do every Friday. I release an update of some of the hottest things that are
Yeah,
happening in tech. And if you try to keep up literally with everything that's going on, to your point, good luck. Because there's
yeah,
things that I say on Friday that by Monday the next week, I'm like, yeah, no,
yeah,
I actually wouldn't do that anymore because this new voice engine just came out. And actually, something I said I don't think is mature yet. I've seen it now. I actually would. So if you really were just chasing the
yeah,
shiny bauble,
yeah.
you're going to die of a heart attack.
For sure, for sure. And what I mean, because I love your perspective. What would you advise then if things are moving so quickly? Like, do you advise people to test, to iterate, hold back? Like, I guess it all comes down to that assessment and that understanding of the business first. But I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are kind of feeling
So
paralyzed
yeah.
a bit.
So here's my recommendation on this topic. And just this is based on kind of like a process to follow. I think many people I encounter, they don't actually understand their operation as well as
Hmm.
they should. And that to me is a huge red flag. If you don't know how things move through your organization from soup to
Yeah.
nuts, and you know this is how and how we make decisions and how things, if you don't know that, you are dead in the water. And the number
Hmm.
of organizations I encounter where they're trying to meet the business needs, and it's like you don't even understand how things work in your own house.
Yeah.
You can't meet anybody's needs because you don't know how it works in your shop. You got to
Hmm.
know your shop. I think then at that point, then you can start to say, okay, now what really is most needed by the organization in terms of the tech trends. From my experience, it depends on the size of the organization and the expertise you have on your team. If
Hmm.
you've got somebody who loves geeking out on this stuff and just they do it just naturally, like that's me. Like
Yeah.
I would do it whether anybody asked me to or not. You don't need
Yeah.
to tell me to do it. I'll do it. If you've got somebody, great. If you're not a big enough organization or you don't have enough people or you don't have the appetite for it, you need to find the people
Yeah.
outside your organization that do and lean on them
Yeah.
because honestly, there are very few people I know that can actually keep up with this stuff and actually
Yeah.
make sense of it. And that's not the people who can or somehow better. It's just like, well, no, that's their niche. That's what they're
Yeah.
really good at. It's kind of what we talked about of you need to be humble enough to know when this is not my thing
Yeah.
and I'm not going to fake it and pretend because I'm just going to get myself in a whole lot of trouble and I'm going to lean on the people that do. And I think that's
Yeah.
what I've seen is, yeah, you should be encouraging your organization to be experimenting, to be
Yeah.
trying things out, but you should be getting the guidance and direction from people who actually know it. Because there's a lot
Yeah.
of charlatans out there right
Yeah.
now that are making promises. And if you're not tech savvy enough, you're going to get
Yeah.
taken to lunch. You're going to
Yeah.
be like, oh, this is so great. And you're not going to realize it was a complete vaporware until you get to the other side. But I think
Yeah.
that's where I see a lot of people struggling with the pressure of trying to keep up. And I'm like, don't
Yeah.
let the people who love doing it and just listen to them and go, what do you think?
Yeah. 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 I think that's really good. But you do need to be proactive in getting close to them. You can't just leave it up to them to operate in isolation.
No.
Like I think that's key, particularly if you want to maintain that perspective of being the thought leader on talent development or organization. But we've seen a lot of success with people who are inherently passionate about about whatever it is that we do. You don't. Many of them aren't developers or
No.
AI engineers, but they're inherently passionate about this and they can follow it. The most important thing we've seen is they ask smart questions.
Yes.
That's been the big indicator of whether someone's going to be a good partner.
Well, and I think that's where one of my biggest concerns is if you don't know your own shop, you
Yeah,
are you are in big trouble.
yeah,
You are in big trouble. And that's what I see far too much of is when you actually I mean, every organization I've ever worked in, one of the first exercises I do is deeply understand how work happens in my own organization. How,
Hmm.
where does stuff come from? What do we do with it? Who's responsible for that? Where are the handoffs? How does that happen? Understand how that happens, because then you know where things are broken, where there's opportunity, where you're vulnerable, where you have strengths and things like that. Because if you don't know that stuff, you literally are guessing, and you may be taking risks on things that are
Yeah,
checks you can't cash, where you're like, yeah, we
yeah,
can do that. And it's like, how do you know? Because if you don't know
yeah,
how it works in your shop, are you sure you
yeah,
can deliver on that promise? And I see a lot of, well, I'm too busy to do that. And I'm
yeah,
like, that is way too. But I think this even goes back to the AI conversation, because I see this happen all the time where people go, well, where should we do AI? If you don't understand how your stuff works today, you cannot know how
yeah,
to apply AI. And I'm
yeah,
sure, I mean, I'm curious your take, but obviously you had to know how you do game-based skill development. You
exactly.
had to know that intimately to
Yeah.
be able to determine where does AI make sense and where
Hmm.
does it not.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think that's been the really encouraging thing. And as we've continued to develop these products, has been like, yes, we have a very unique, differentiated offering because this is what we've done for the last 14
Right.
years. We know it. We know it back to front, and we have the people who can deliver on it. The one thing I would add, though, when you're thinking about getting started, I do think generative AI, as it has been for so many different social and markets and everything, it is a step change. It is a leap. So
Yes,
I think you should be experimenting with it.
I agree.
And I think you should have, like, find those people. If you don't have that person who's passionate within your own organization, find that person in the broader
Yep.
HR organization, in the sales organization, in the product organization, and say, we want to do something. Find that high value opportunity, whatever it is that's top of mind for the business, and see where you can apply AI to help that increase that forward. I think that we've seen very broad adoption of the co-pilot tool that we have and productivity enhancement tools. Those are kind of bread and butter. I think if you're not using them already, you're probably behind at this stage. Like that, I think everyone should be doing. But then these really innovative next gen applications around the user generated content, highly immersive, personalized, simulated experiences. Like these are easy things to pilot and test and measure.
Yes, very
They,
much
they're
so.
not they're not huge risk factors. You're not submitting all of your corporate information to an AI cloud. Like it's a pretty easy thing to get going. I would say in a matter of weeks, if you can find that right stakeholder within the
Yep.
business, and I think everyone should be trying to do that. I would say,
No,
oh,
I
like,
I will, if it was not clear from what I said, I 100% agree with what you said. In
yeah,
fact, I task everyone on my teams that 10 to 15% of your time should be spent.
yeah,
I want you experimenting with something you haven't done before. And
yeah,
guess what? It's some of them aren't going to work. And that's
yeah,
fine. That's part of the learning process. I want you pushing that stuff and seeing so that you can come to the table with, I tried this, it didn't work, or it did work, but it didn't work well in this, so that we can go, okay, what else could we do with this? I think one
yeah.
of the challenges I see that organizations face right now is because AI is in such, it's not even really new anymore, but I guess in some ways it is. There's a lot of organizational hesitation around it right now that I'm seeing, where
Hmm.
companies are a little like, "Ugh, we don't know how we feel
Yeah,
about it." And this is where I, my IT friends probably wouldn't like this, but I'm like, do risk assessments, identify where there's healthy levels of risk that you can take, and then go for it and try
yeah,
it and see what's the worst that can happen. Well, we learned something, and now if we're going to scale it, we're going to have to go bigger. But I agree. If you're not experimenting regularly, you will
yeah,
be left in the dust. You will
yeah,
literally be left in the dust, especially with the pace at which things are moving now.
yeah. It actually blew me away. We work with one of the definitely going to help it going 10 largest financial institutions in the US.
Okay.
They signed our AI consent form in 2 weeks. For a tiny population in a very curtailed, defined area. And I was blown away. I was like, there's no ways we're ever going to get AI to happen. But I think they did really, really well to, as you said, understand the risk, contain it within this environment, and then you can move fairly quickly. So I was encouraged to see that and wanted to share that story to give encouragement to other people.
Well, and I think,
and we have seen the counterfactual, but it does happen.
Well, and I think that's where, we're in this weird stage where I think that goes back to where you need to be doing a lot of this human skill work well, which is influencing. You need to be proactively influencing, proactively looking for those opportunities where you can say, here's a healthy risk we can take for this specific purpose. We have a point of view on this. We've experimented with this, and this is why we believe this is the way we do. You do that well, you can get through a lot of red tape with that. You can get through a lot of red tape with that if you do that well. If you do that poorly and you go, we want to do the AI thing for our senior leaders, you're just going to get shut down faster than you know what to do with.
One question I had for you is you're discussing or explaining the way you guys work. When you're getting your teams to spend 10 or 15% of their time, whatever that number is, on new and innovative stuff, at what stage do you involve the business, or does it completely depend? Do you get people to partner with the business to explore this technology together, or do you guys kind of decide within your group that we've tested these technologies, these are the ones we want to bring in?
So we tend to, at least normally, which may not surprise people who know me, normally my groups are probably on the front end of the curve when it comes to the technology piece.
Yeah.
Normally we're not the laggards. Normally we're the ones that have you guys heard of this? And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But so for us, I've really worked to build a reputation of saying, come to us with your problems. Let us be the ones to creatively come up with solutions. And so I would say the partnership happens very early, but it happens after we've understood what are you trying to do? Yeah. And again, not the request form, but just tell me in layman's terms, what are you really trying to accomplish here? Help me understand what it is you're trying to do. And then that gives us the opportunity to pitch. And again, going back to that sales thing of sales and influence, it's we're going to pitch you on a different way. I know you probably were thinking we were going to go this. What if we did this? And sometimes the door is slammed in your face. No way. Not, you're like, okay, all right, we're going to set that one aside and we're going to, find a new opportunity for it. Sometimes you'll get the person who goes, interesting. What would that take? Well, why don't we run a small, let's just run it and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, well, we'll learn quick, we'll shut it down and move on. And if it does, then we go big with it. And I can say in my career, that's when I've gotten some of the biggest blank checks I've ever seen, where you prove this out real quick and all of a sudden people go, how much do you want to do that for the rest of the world? And you're like, whoa, what?
Because the ROI is there, right? Once you prove it out, it's there. But I love that you've been able to establish that dynamic where you get to hear people's problems. I think so many people aren't in that position. And then if you aren't, you need to go out and ask.
Exactly.
Because I would completely agree that I think that's the starting point. I think we've sometimes come into organizations who have done all the research on all the AI vendors and have come up with different market maps and all of this, and they just end up in this stalling space because they're like, well, how do I truly assess whether this is better than that, or this is better than that, or this is which direction? It's like, no, you're starting in the wrong place. Start with what the problem is, and then find a couple, test them out, pilot, as you say, and then hopefully
and that's how we learn.
Blank check.
Exactly. And that's how we learn. And then we go, well, this worked. So how do you know that's the right vendor, or how do you know that's the right tool? Because it worked.
Because
it solved the problem.
Here it is. Here it is.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been super fun. I hope all of you who have watched and listened take something away, not only just about how AI is affecting the future of developing skills in creative and different ways, but also how to think differently about driving innovation and creating innovation in your organization, because there's a lot more to it than just going out and picking the right tool based on some top 10 sheet or a headline, and actually understanding the problems you're trying to solve, the people you're working with, and how to move that forward. So thanks for joining me, Hugh. This was awesome.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Love it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and we will see you on the other side.